Kia ora koutou katoa. Welcome to Raw Politics, Newsroom's weekly podcast on the big political issues. I'm senior political reporter Marc Daalder, and joining me from Auckland is Tim Murphy, Newsroom's co-editor. From Christchurch, Sam Sachdeva, Newsroom's national affairs editor. Kia ora korua. How are you guys doing? How are you recovering from US election night? Did you stay up like I did into the early hours of the morning, fretting and watching the results come in?
I didn't, because it was clear to me from very early on that this was a significant and joyous result. So I left CNN to it about probably 10 o'clock at night.
You would have been watching Fox News, no, Tim?
Couldn't bring myself.
Yeah, look, I'm probably the same as Tim. It became pretty clear early on which way it was heading, so I didn't really see any point in staying up into the wee hours, really soaking it all in. But I wanted to congratulate you, Mark. You know, you were on the podcast last week hoping for a Trump win, so you got your wish. You must be delighted.
It's fantastic. Everything is fine. Well, we'll be talking about that a little bit more with Laura Walters, our usual host who has been in the United States for us the past week. I spoke with her a little bit earlier after the results came in about the election, her experience there on the ground and what it means going forward. We'll get a bit of a chance to chat about that, the three of us as well. But first, our main topic of this week will be the Treaty Principles Bill, New Zealand's own bit of controversial electioneering that maybe has come in this week. So that'll be our topic right after the break. This week, we saw the surprise introduction of the Treaty Principles Bill into Parliament. It was supposed to be introduced next week, I believe, but it has been brought forward a week. That all came out, spilled out on Tuesday night when the Waitangi Tribunal released an interim report, its second, into the Treaty Principles Bill, a scathing report which called it one of the, if it were to pass fully through Parliament, one of the worst treaty breaches in modern times. At the same time, it became apparent, it was leaked, that the government had told the tribunal that it was bringing forward the introduction of the bill. There's a particular tweak in the law that means that the tribunal can't comment on or report on anything that is currently before Parliament, so they did rush out their report after being notified of this. The introduction itself was pretty anticlimactic. It's just that the bill pops into Parliament, but the first readings aren't going to happen until Thursday next week. Tim, I wanted to bring you into this first because you've been following quite a few of the Waitangi Tribunal issues as they've come in. It feels like there is a real, antipathy that has built up between the tribunal and the government. David Seymour saying that he thought the tribunal was the one who had leaked the changed timing of the bill this week in Parliament, and this sense maybe from the tribunal that the government was trying to pull a fast one on them and stop them from releasing their report. What do you think of this kind of dynamic that's been evolving?
Well, the tribunal may not be able to discuss and investigate and report on these sorts of things in the future if the wider reform that this government's looking at of the tribunal and clipping its wings and restricting it greatly takes effect. So I think for them, it was a vital decision to bring forward and make public their view on this. And I think that was good. The public deserves to know that ahead of and with discussion and then the hearings that will be held into this. The politics of it are interesting from ACT, and our own Fox Myers written on this for Newsroom, and it's sort of sitting there obvious in some ways, that the political strategy from David Seymour is the old strategy of each time the tide comes in, it comes further up the beach. So you do this once, it goes away for a while, you find another way or another means or another sort of form of doing it again, and then you come again and again. And eventually you get, their hope, to what would be a referendum on these principles. So what this is not rewriting the treaty, it's attempting to rewrite the interpretation of the treaty. The interpretation of the treaty has been absolutely clear by almost all academics, legal scholars, the judiciary to the highest levels, politicians, over decades now. So there's not actually any lack of clarity about the interpretation of the treaty in terms of principles among those who have spent time, studied, experienced it, and those who are aware and expert in tikanga. So what I think is really desired ultimately is a non-expert debate on this. Everyone knows where expert views are. This is seeking to push forward a non-expert general view of how people's gut out there in the populace sees this. And that has sort of echoes, and it's tempting at this stage to make everything, in the shadow of the American experience this week. But it has sort of echoes of that yes, we know what all you people tell us this is, but we'd like to actually have our say and be quite proud of whatever ignorance we bring to it. So it evens it out from informed and known expertise to a broader feel that things aren't fair and that this wasn't the intention. So let's see. This is the first run. There'll be others over the next years in terms of Parliament.
Sam, I'm curious. For me, there is this interesting dynamic, and it's not new. It's quite obvious, but of David Seymour being the only advocate for this legislation in Parliament. Yes, the government will vote for it at first reading, but after it comes back, National has said very clearly that they'll vote it down. New Zealand First is very clear about that as well. Winston Peters doesn't even believe that there are principles to the treaty, so why would the government be defining them? Can you talk about that dynamic again a little bit? This coalition government, which is broadly aligned on a lot of different things, and here there is a serious point of difference, but still, maybe the awkwardness for the National and New Zealand First parties of having to support it a little bit, and then Seymour's position as the lone voice on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think you framed it well in your own piece this week, Mark, talking about how lonely Seymour seems, and even lonelier he wasn't around at Parliament when the bill was introduced. So you had all the dissenting voices, but no one speaking in favour of it. But this is not something he's unfamiliar with, right? I think we talked about it a little bit last week, where he spent 2 terms, I think, as the sole MP in ACT. He's quite familiar with going out on a limb and being out there by himself. So I think that's not going to deter him. And, it's a different strategy for him. He's not concerned, as National is, with getting, say, 40% of the vote or trying to win over a majority of the public. He only has to play to a smaller segment of the population. So, I think that's an incentive for him to be a loud voice and to go out on a limb as well. And I think he's made a point of distinguishing himself from National. I think he referred to them as cowards at one point, or showing cowardice. I can't remember the exact wording, but that's something that's going to appeal to him. If he can draw that distinction and actually grow his party, it doesn't necessarily matter that it's at the expense of National if it grows ACT. So he's in a different game altogether.
And I suppose, we're used to seeing coalitions or governing arrangements where parties don't agree on everything. But how often do we see something where, it is this bizarre situation to me, like the government is supporting this legislation. It's not just that David Seymour has a policy, but it's not a policy that will ever go ahead, like Winston Peters', big future fund policy, the $200 billion infrastructure fund. This is a policy that will get an airing and then immediately be crushed, even by his own coalition colleagues. Are there other examples that we can think of for how that's been handled in the past? And I guess whether that's likely to lead to long-lasting bad blood between the governing parties, or whether it's just, look, everyone's on the same page, we disagree on this thing, and it has to go this way, right? This is just the unfortunate kind of outcome of the coalition negotiations.
Look, there aren't any direct parallels that readily spring to mind in terms of, where a bill is dead on arrival, but it's being advanced anyway. But in terms of coalition tensions and navigating those, this isn't new. We saw that on a few occasions with Labour, New Zealand First and the Greens in the 2017 term of Parliament, where New Zealand First pulled its support on some issues like abortion reform and the way they were handling that, 3 strikes, the reforms there. And that definitely frayed the relationship, I think. There was not a lot of trust towards the end between some of the party members and MPs and officials. So it's difficult. I think probably what's different here is that this has been very well flagged in advance. The condition was, we will support it at first reading, but we're not committing any further. Presumably Luxon and Peters said during the negotiations, we're not going to back this. And if they didn't, they've certainly made it clear now. So I don't think anyone's under any illusions Maybe if Seymour keeps doubling down on his rhetoric and trying to suggest that National and New Zealand First are running away or afraid, that might make things more difficult. But Luxon's line is that this is New Zealand's first true MMP coalition, so this is a test of whether or not he can live up to that.
Is it the case, I think it is, that Chris Luxon said at a press conference some months ago that this was the item on the long agenda of coalition agreement negotiations that took them so much longer? That it was, is this the one, Mark, that was one of the last things standing that blew out the negotiations because ACT kept holding out for it, obviously. So the sort of discussion you're talking about, Sam, must have been happening, that National New Zealand First saying, well, look, we just won't support it. And then this being a sort of a final backstop position, okay, we still want it, we need it, but you can do that. So it's sort of a halfway house just to be able to secure it. And, as we've said many times, ACT secured a lot in those negotiations. But this one was obviously almost bottom line.
Yeah, Luxon did say that at a postcab a couple of months ago. It kind of slipped out in the context of discussing the bill, and then he wouldn't really say it again when asked to. But it seemed quite clearly, suggesting that there were probably many holdups in those coalition negotiations, but this was maybe one of the top couple that really dragged things out. The other kind of, I guess, coalition or grouping that's emerged around the Treaty Principles Bill is this week we've seen the three opposition parties issue a joint press release kind of signaling a joint position, joint campaign on opposing the Treaty Principles Bill, but specifically calling on Luxon to vote it down at first reading, to not even let it get to select committee. It's not unusual for parties to share views, and the alignment of these three parties on this issue has been very clear for many months. But actually teaming up and putting out a joint press release has happened before. Labour and the Greens had a joint electricity policy before the 2014 election, but it's unusual, I think it would be fair to say, for them to work so closely together on something like this. What do you think that says about the politics, the angles that these opposition parties are going for, from their perspective, the opportunity that they see in joining up to oppose the Treaty Principles Bill?
Perhaps it's, if you're Labour and doing the calculations, if you think about it from the larger party's perspective, if they are going to win power at the next election, they'll probably need the Greens and Te Pāti Māori to go into coalition. So, is this a chance to signal, look, we can work together, we can be adults, we can, function as one on these things? I don't know. It might be a possibility. And I guess if you want to contrast it with the sort of dissenting voices on the government side, it's not the worst idea. It'll be interesting to see how long that holds and whether all the parties can sort of stay together. They don't have to do it across the entire process of the bill, but there might be areas where, for example, Te Pāti Māori goes too far. I saw Rawiri Waititi suggesting that Christopher Luxon might have committed a treasonous act. I think it was Luxon or maybe Seymour in regards to this bill, and maybe it's a reasonable argument to make. I don't know, but I would suspect Chris Hipkins wouldn't use that language. So, how do they each continue to assert their own party identities while trying to present a united front on this? But yeah, I'd be interested what you think, Tim.
Well, just as an aside on that, the point is interesting that they've sort of done this week, because this week there was that wild Roy Morgan poll, and we won't get into the mechanics or the science of Roy Morgan. Mark's smirking, and Sam, these things better than I do. But even so, for the first time, it had the grouping of those three opposition parties able to outpoint the grouping of the other three current government parties by 48-47, with the left bloc up 8 and the government down 7, I think it was, or very close to that. But that was something that, you're right, if they are going to try and take the Treasury benches in 2 years' time, they're going to probably have to form up, because otherwise it's not looking great, especially with Labour still being so low.
And now we're back with Laura Walters, our usual host, but who's been away for a few weeks, enjoying a chill, relaxed vacation in the United States. How have things been on your end, Laura?
Yeah, I've just had my feet up. I've been kicking back. It's been totally fine. I wanted to make sure that all of our listeners out there know that I am okay. I've obviously been away for a couple of weeks now. They haven't trapped me here. I am free to move, and I will be on a plane home, and I'll be commiserating on that 12-hour flight. What a wild ride, Mark.
Well, good to hear that. While you were putting your feet up, we did have the US presidential election, and I think our engaged and educated Raw Politics audience will be aware, but Donald Trump won. He won both the Electoral College vote and almost certainly the popular vote as of our sort of recording time now, which makes him the first Republican since 2004 to win the popular vote, and means that we get a second Trump presidency. Laura, in between the vacationing, you did go to a few rallies and various other political events in the United States. What was the vibe in terms of, did you see this Trump victory coming, or was it a believable a possibility, in your time in the U.S. before the election?
Yeah, and I think everyone knows we're joking, Mark, but to clarify, I've been working bloody hard here. We were starting out in Arizona, then to Pennsylvania, went to DC for election night. So I've been, around a lot of those crucial areas. And to answer your question, yeah, it was always a possibility. I mean, you saw the polls, and polls count for nothing, don't they, as we've seen, but you saw those polls, it was neck and neck. Most of them were within that margin of error, and that was the sense that I was getting while I was talking to people as well. It wasn't just academics and party people and NGO community organisers. I have spent a lot of time here talking to just regular, everyday Americans, US citizens, both on the Trump and on the Harris side. Trump supporters, Harris supporters, independents, undecideds. A lot of people who think they're both pretty crap, to be honest, and they were going to largely be casting their vote for the least worst person, I guess, or more of a vote against someone than a vote for someone. But it was, talking to people, it was really hard to know which way it was going to go. When you were talking to Trump supporters, they were so sure that they had won this. They were just absolutely resolute. They thought, we've got this in the bag. Their line is too big to rig. Of course, a reference to allegations, of course, unfounded allegations of election fraud, election tampering, things like that. But when you were at those rallies, I went to this car rally, about 300 cars in a ranch, and there was a rodeo, and there were flags flying everywhere, Confederate flags, United States flags, flags with, the Trump assassination attempt photo. So felt very, Trumpian. And they were so sure they had it in the bag. And then you'd go to a Harris rally and you'd speak to people, and they were so sure they had it too. They were saying that it's women that often get out and vote. It's women that care about reproductive rights and freedoms. And it's those types of issues that were going to mobilize people and ensure that they would have a win. It wasn't until, I think it was election day, it was actually polling day here, Tuesday, the 5th of November, and we went and we were talking to some union bosses in Philadelphia. And of course, the unions have historically gone for the Democrats, they've historically gone blue. We know that there's been some discontent in recent years, but hearing how strongly these firefighters were supporting Trump and had done in recent elections, and while they might have not publicly endorsed a candidate, that was personally what they were saying. And speaking of those communities, those middle-class, working-class communities that have been doing it really tough, and how much they were supporting Trump, I started to get more of a sense at that point that a Trump presidency, a second Trump presidency, was very likely.
And having been to a Trump rally, like you say, and the Kamala election night party, different contexts, of course, but how did the vibe differ there, not just in people's surety of their candidates' kind of chances, but, is it particularly different to be at one than the other?
It was. I think one of the things you have to note first was the actual physical space. Kamala Harris was holding these big outdoor events, different. They held events in lots of different places, but Kamala Harris's election night rally, it was outdoors. It was at the university that she attended in Washington, D.C. The Trump rally a couple of days earlier was, of course, in an enclosed stadium. That's a safety precaution after those assassination attempts. And so to start with the Trump rally, because that's what I went to first, you're in this big enclosed stadium, so it immediately felt a bit more like perhaps a music festive, concert, a big concert. Someone actually described it to me as having a feeling of kind of like being in a mega church. And I thought, oh, damn, I've missed a trick with my headline. I could have said inside Trump's mega church. Anyway, but it did feel like that. You had this person on stage who was putting themselves up as almost a godlike figure somewhat. It feels like there are some similarities, sometimes between people who have feelings of authoritarian figures and, these religious figures or prophets. And it felt like that as well. I'm here to save you. I'll fix it immediately. All these troubles, I can make them go away. There wasn't nuance. There wasn't policy, position and plans. And people were chanting, there were fists in the air, they're yelling, fight, fight, fight. They're yelling USA. And so while, talking person to person with people that are very nice, very calm, very hopeful and happy, once they got into that group atmosphere within that stadium, there was a lot of passion, and you could tell that people were really riled up. Comparing that to the Kamala Harris rally on election night, that was, to just set the scene a little bit, there were people just grooving away as they're walking in. They're taking selfie videos. You can smell weed in the air, so give you a bit of the vibe going on there. People were just kind of, they were happy and they were hopeful, at least at the beginning of the evening. But it was a lot more of a relaxed vibe, and it felt more about community, maybe, and there wasn't that same anger at being hard done by, I think, sitting underneath things.
While you were at the Kamala Harris rally on election night, Kamala Harris didn't herself address that crowd that night, right? What did you make of I suppose, her decision not to do that, but then the speech that she did give the next day, which, where she conceded but also laid out, in my view, sort of a more positive vision for what America still can be even under a Trump presidency?
I was disappointed for her supporters, to be honest. I think she missed a trick there, not coming out on the night. People waited for a really long time. And, this is kind of a side rant or tangent. There's nothing really that pisses me off more than politicians who think that their time is more important than everyone else's time. People have left their children, they've left their work. A lot of these people have given up countless hours to canvass for her campaign, to hit the phones, to go out and vote for her. And they showed up. They waited in lines. They, it was hours and hours and hours. And then it was on 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock. It became clear that she wasn't showing up. And I think it was well after midnight when one of her campaign team came out and just briefly said to the people who were left, people started leaving, to the people who were left, hey, sorry, she's not coming. We'll keep counting the votes tonight. Make sure they're all counted. She'll see you tomorrow. And people just kind of put their heads down and left. Now, for someone who cares about their community and what they've given to her and to their campaign, even a short appearance to say thank you so much for all you have done. Thank you for backing me. It's not looking good at this stage, even if it was too early to call it, even if she hadn't conceded, even if she hadn't called Trump yet, she could have come out and said, it's not looking good. That doesn't mean that it's over. We will continue to organise. We will continue to fight in different ways. But thank you for all that you have done. It means a lot to me. That's all she needed to say. A 2-minute speech, off she goes. She could have come out again the next day after after conceding to Trump. So I do think she missed a trick there. And you're right, Mark. She did lay out a really positive vision for America. I think she talked about being full of love, coming out the following day that she was proud. I just wrote down some quotes from her speech that she was proud of the race that she ran and the way she ran it, just not just the what, but the how. And then she said, this is not a time to throw up our hands. This is a time to roll up our sleeves. And she spoke about, the idea of hope, even if there's darkness at the moment under Trump, even if things are looking bleak, that there can be hope and there can be light and there can be a vision for a better America going forwards. Also really important talking about how she had been engaging with Trump, right? And that to have that peaceful and smooth transition of power, to send a signal to her supporters, this needs to be done the right way. Please don't go out there and, become violent, become agitated, anything like that. So I thought it was a good speech the next day. She hit all the right notes. What do you think? I mean, this is, this must feel, you must be feeling this deeply, I imagine.
Yeah, I on the speech, I thought it was very good. I thought she struck the right balance between, illustrating a clear contrast between herself and how Trump dealt with his 2020 election loss, while also saying, hey, you can concede that you've lost an election without saying that you've lost the battle, right? And she was very clear to say, we continue to fight. We fight at the ballot box, in the courts, and in the public, square, not in a violent way, right? And so that was important because on the flip side, you do have Trump, who has shown himself to be utterly unfit to be the president of the United States, to have no regard for democracy, for the rule of law, for the Constitution, unless and only if it can help him out in a particular situation. Personally, and I wrote a piece in Newsroom that touches on some of these themes, I think I'm very petrified for America. I think that the American experiment in electing our own leaders for 235 years has never been in maybe more peril than now, except maybe in the 1860s when another election result was rejected by half the country, and America's bloodiest war came out of that. But Trump here has won. We know that the Constitution bars him from running again in 4 years, but the Constitution also barred him from attempting to overthrow the government last time. And even if Trump does do, the sane thing and step down in 4 years' time, the lesson that he has given to his party is that you can attempt an insurrection. You can try to contest an election that you lost through violence and through extra-legal means, and you can still get reelected in 4 years' time anyways. So there's no downside to giving it a go. And, unlearning that lesson, it's not something that you can put back in the box easily. It is something that can be put back in the box, but only if there are actually consequences for the people who are involved in rebellion or sedition, which in this situation there weren't. And I worry that it will take yet another situation like January 6th for America to have the opportunity to take a different tack on how it responds to serious threats to democracy.
That's the thing as well, isn't it? That going forwards, will there be accountability for what's happened before? I mean, no, not that we've seen, and what might happen in the future. And when you're looking at what Trump is planning and what he's said about the people that he will surround himself with, people who will be loyal above all else. It's not about necessarily having the credentials or the experience or the competency to be part of that administration, to be his guardrail, to have that institutional knowledge. It's people that will say yes, who won't hold him accountable, and vice versa. He won't hold them accountable either. So I think who he puts around himself and what that team looks like going forwards, especially, Republicans now, they've won the presidency, they've got the Senate and Congress, so it's kind of not unfettered power, but they've got a lot of control there. So what they do with it and how the country reacts to that as well will be very interesting to watch.
Yeah, and there was a phenomenon in the first Trump administration of people who joined his staff and acted as moderating forces or voices of reason. And I think that if you work for Donald Trump, will work with Donald Trump after January 6th and after everything that has come since. No one can count on you to be a voice of reason, right? You have already given up that commitment to democracy and the Constitution. That should be the foremost obligation of any public servant.
And then I guess we just wait for 4 years and see what people think. What is the track record that Trump has? He can't blame someone else if he surrounds himself with all of his people that he's handpicked. He said he knows everyone in Washington now, so he's going to surround himself with the right people. They've got all of that control there. Now, what policies will he actually enact? We saw even in the day or two before the election, he's throwing out different policy ideas, 100% tariffs on Mexico, death penalty for immigrants who kill someone in the United States of America, automatic death penalty, no matter the state. These things that he's just said on the fly, which ones of those will actually be enacted? What impact will that have on people's lives? And then how will they react in 4 years' time? If it doesn't make their lives better, will they vote him out? Or is obviously he can't run again, but what does it mean for the Republican Party, I guess, beyond that? It's going to be, I think, interesting. I already use, that's such a mild term. I mean, you watch kind of through your hands almost in a bit of a state of fear. I would say, though, I'm talking to you the day after from Philadelphia, the day after the election, and they boarded up shop fronts in DC. They put up gates around, historic buildings here in Philadelphia, and there hasn't been any threat of violence that we've seen. People have been calm. Yes, people have felt happy or unhappy depending on who they voted for, but it does seem to be relatively calm. There's not the violence that some people were predicting. So I guess that's a positive so far. It's a low bar, but it seems to be one positive so far.
Potentially. I think that probably the violent scenario would have been one where Kamala Harris had won and then Donald Trump attempted to contest it again. But because because Kamala Harris has done the right thing and said, yeah, I lost, that takes away that a little bit of that heat out of the room. It was great to have Laura's thoughts from the ground in the United States just there. Before we move on to wrap up the show, Tim, Sam, did you guys have anything that you wanted to add on the US election? I'm sure everyone's got a couple hundred hot takes, but maybe limit to just the one or two.
Yeah, I've got a couple, and trying not to get into the detail of the American Party stuff that you know much better, Mark, and you guys talked about so well. But in general, remember that every incumbent government where inflation ran out of control, even though the inflation has come down, and even though they have different ideologies or different sort of ends of the political spectrum that they were governing from, suffered greatly when the elections came up. Ours, the UK we know, now the States. So there's a broader thing even than the very broad sweep of topics that that can be read into the American result. Second thing is, I still think a very good observation was Tom Nichols in the Atlantic, and I think I said it on this program once before, that boil it all down, a lot of the people who voted Trump didn't really like, or they did understand that he was a rogue, everything else, but that they were after what he called social revenge, which is just that whole thing, which lots been said about in the last few days, that pushing back against all these people who tried to tell us what to do and think, and thought they were better than us, and all that basic thing, that they've been winning for too long, we've been on the back foot, bugger it, we're going to push you back. And I think that is very pertinent too. And the third quick thing is, all the hyperbole beforehand from both sides. One was, if Kamala wins, it'll be the end of our country, which it wouldn't have been. The other was that if he wins, it's going to be the end of democracy. It won't. It may be that the States has a new tint, a new tinge of its democracy. It's democracy with American characteristics, as the Chinese sort of have theirs. But I think, the great abstract, a bit pompous view among the heady thinkers in the States that, you know, America is a shining city on top of a hill, and that there's never been a greater idea than America, and that American democracy is the dream and this great project for the rest of the world, is always overstated. It's got its flaws: politicised judiciary, gerrymandering, voter suppression, all the things that, you know, compromise American democracy as well. So this may well send things backwards in various ways for people's rights, for rule of law, but it won't end American democracy. It'll just change it again.
Yeah, I mean, for my part, I'm fascinated to see, you know, whether the demographic trends that appear to have shifted during this election take root in the US. You know, black voters, Latino voters are moving towards Trump. There's been a lot of talk about racial depolarization, that, you know, voters of each party aren't necessarily split along racial lines anymore. So is that, you know, an anomaly that's sort of unique to Trump in this election, or does that take hold? And if so, how does the Democratic Party adjust to that? And it's going to be fascinating watching the Democrats in general to see, you know, who are the future leaders now. You know, you've got the incumbent president gone now, the vice president, Kamala Harris, presumably. I imagine this is it for her. Maybe she tries again, but I think it would be a tall ask. But you've got a lot of, you know, quite well-known Democratic governors in different states who might put their hands up. So, yeah, how does the party sort of reshape itself, and who takes the lead here over the next 4 years? Because as Kamala Harris said, there's going to be a lot to fight for and fight against. So, you know, how does the party respond, and can they stay united? And then, of course, there's the element for New Zealand, the New Zealand aspect. You know, how do we deal with this? What does this mean for things like AUKUS trade? And we talked about that last week. Probably don't need to go into it in too much more detail now. But look, it's going to be a tough time for our government and governments around the world. So, you know, how nimbly can we respond? What changes do we have to make? And, you know, can we strike deals with the famously transactional Trump that work out in our favour? So, yeah, a lot to chew over in the coming months and years.
To wrap up, we've got some recommendations for you, something that we've read, watched, or listened to that we really enjoyed. First up, Tim.
Mine's a story from the RNZ website in which they look at in depth who are the people behind the Toitu Te Tiriti protest or activist group that is sort of marshalling and leading the wave of protest they expect to come over coming months against government policies to do with Māori.
My recommendation is from Politico Europe, written quite quickly after the election result, talking to a number of key people in the sort of climate world about what Trump's election means for global sort of climate cooperation and action and diplomacy. Sam?
Well, you'll love this, Mark. I am, in fact, recommending your piece from this week on the US election and specifically the grievous threat that Trump poses to the American Republic. I wouldn't necessarily say it's a light, breezy, optimistic read, so maybe prepare yourself for that before getting into it. But look, it's very thorough. And it actually does end on a somewhat positive note, talking about the reconstruction after the American Civil War and saying, you know, there are ways that the country can move on from whatever damage Trump does. So, you know, fingers crossed that is the case. But I found it, fascinating, if a little bit bleak at points.
I've been reliably informed that piece is woke, and Donald Trump is perfectly great. So it's not a big deal.
Oh, great. Good to hear.
Yeah. I'll be rescinding it soon. That is it for Raw Politics this week. Thank you so much to our readers, listeners, and viewers. And thank you as well to our producer, Dave Filoi-Ali'i. We'll see you next week here on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And in the meantime, if you've got any burning questions, you can email us at laura.walters@newsroom.co.nz.
Well, Mark, we won't see you next week, will we?
No, I will be away in Azerbaijan reporting on the climate summit, where some of the implications of Donald Trump's election will be kind of reverberating out. But also, you know, the world is bigger than America, and a lot of the rest of the world will be there working hard on things too.
Bon voyage. And Sam, we won't see you either. You'll be in Peru.
Indeed, covering the APEC summit as all the world leaders there try and figure out what Trump's presidency is going to mean for them.
Well, we'll try to get by, but thankfully Laura is back to lead us.